for Standard 6 English, and we're going to be solving a written comprehension today. So without further ado, you can pause this video and read the passage if you want to solve the comprehension with me. This is the first half of the story, and once you've read it or screenshotted it, this is the second part of the same passage. It's not very long, and you can do the questions with me, so I'll show those to you once everybody's finished reading the passage. So when you move on to the questions, the first thing you will notice is the questions tend to follow the same order that the plot does. So for example, if the first question here is about why the old lady was worried about Luke's disappearance, you'll realize that you'll find the answer to this somewhere in the first passage itself, in the first paragraph of the passage itself, So here, what you will see is the answer for this question will be the old lady who cooked and cleaned and tidied for him, called the police, and this is the right answer. This is the exact part of what they're asking you, which is why she called them and how she knew that he was missing. But since it's for 2 marks, you can also add another sentence about how he had no family according to her and how he didn't know anybody in the neighborhood, because then you know that you've answered all the information that the old lady gave the police, and you've written every aspect of what she told them. So this basically gives you a very complete answer, and once you've covered any of your questions like this, you can move on to the next one. So now that you've spoken about why she was worried about Luke's disappearance, because you answered that, the next question is what you can gather about Luke's personality. Mention any 4 points. So in these kind of questions, you can either interpret an answer on your own, and you will have to find personality traits on your own. But in this passage, it's actually been made very clear what his personality traits are, so it makes the work for you a lot easier. Because immediately after your first answer, which ends somewhere around here, it cuts to Luke's personality traits. So the first thing they tell you is that he spent his time studying and writing, and so this becomes point number 1, which is you can say that Luke was very studious as a person. Then they tell you that he was also a very pleasant gentleman. So your second character trait becomes pleasant. And a little quiet, which is 3rd, but always polite, which is 4th. So if you write exactly these 2 sentences, you will get your full 2 marks because all 4 of the points have been covered, and it's very simply given to you in this passage. So you don't even have to try coming up with characteristics of your own. Now that answer is done and you move on to the 3rd question, it asks you 2 parts, and this means you need to tick off each of the parts correctly. The first part is why the policemen were astonished as they stepped into his sitting room, and second, describe the sight that they saw when they stepped into the room. So first is a why answer, and the second is a description. So over here, when you talk about the sitting room, you'll find that there are 2 aspects of your answer, which again have been given to you very clearly, so it shouldn't take you very long to find this in your passage. But a good way to try finding your answer in the passage is looking for keywords. So here you know that the question said why were they astonished, so you can search for the word astonished in the passage, because then you know that that's exactly the answer to your question. So here it tells you that the walls were practically covered with books in addition, and books in addition were heaped on both tables. So if you've read this passage, you'll know that Luke has been described as a neat person, and his room, which is mentioned over here, didn't have many pictures or photographs. So obviously the fact that there's this one room, which is a sitting room, covered with books and paper and typewriters, etc., is what's astonishing the policeman. So this is the first part of your answer, which is why did it surprise them? Because it was entirely different from the one that they had inspected already. This is the answer to your why. And then this is the description that the question is asking for. So you should end it over here, because it's not asking you anything about Mrs. Seymour or whether she had been telling the truth about his interests. But here you know that your first aspect is answered when you talk about it's different from the other rooms, and the second aspect is answered when you give them the description that they asked for. And so once you've done this, question 3 should be answered sufficiently well, and then you can move on to question 4. Question 4 tells you that Mrs. Seymour was forbidden to enter Luke's sitting room. Why do you think this was the case? Give 2 reasons. And now you will notice that they've asked you why you think this is the case, because they haven't given you a clear answer. And so here this is going to require some of your interpretation of the passage. So you can scroll back up and look for hints at what Luke's character was like, or what Mrs. Seymour's character was like, and why they didn't allow, why she couldn't have been allowed to enter the room. So if I had to answer this question, I would have said that the first reason could have been, that Luke seems to be a person who really cares about his interests and his books, and so maybe he didn't want to have the old lady, Mrs. Seymour, going through his sheets of paper, etc. And my second reason could have been that since Luke was described as a quiet person at the start, maybe he was private and he didn't like people going through his things. A third answer could also be that since they talked to you about how she wasn't allowed to enter except when her employer was there, maybe he also didn't trust her that much because she was an employee who worked for him, and so he didn't want to allow her to be in a room with books that he really cares about and all of his, study material, etc. So this again should have two words, like for example, I think it's because he is a private person, and then you can explain that a little more in one sentence. And then second can be, I think it's because he didn't trust Mrs. Seymour that much, and then you write one more line. So once you give two reasons and a sentence each for them, you should get 2 marks for this answer, and that's how you know it's complete. And the fifth question is the only question that's a little bit different from the first four, because it's asking you for vocabulary. And there are two ways to improve your answers for such questions. The first would definitely be to read a little bit more, because the more books you read, the more exposure you have, and your vocabulary grows. So you will understand what it means. But in this case, if you don't know what all of these words mean, but you only know, let's say you know only what these two words mean. Here you know that chaotic comes from the word chaos, and chaos is something that's extremely disorganized and messy. So this seems exactly the same as the word messy, so it can't be the opposite, and you know that it's not option. When you come to disheveled, disheveled again means something that's been ruined, messed up, and it's been thrown out of place. And that again sounds very similar to the description of the word messy. So you know it isn't the third one either. And therefore, even if you don't know what the first word means, it has to be the first word because you know that the other two mean exactly the same as messy. In this case, the word arrayed comes from the word array. And array sounds very similar to the word arrange. It's basically an organization of a set of things. So when you say the books were neatly arrayed on a table, it means that they had been organized properly. And that sounds like exactly the opposite of the word messy. So you know that one, in this case, is the right answer. And although the sixth question has been cropped here, it's asking you to find a word that means the same as the following. And so you apply the same rules that you applied here. You look at all the word options, you see how many you know. If you know all of the word meanings, you should be able to find the synonym immediately. And if you don't, then you can eliminate options one by one, and then you will be able to go back to the passage and find a word that means the same as something. So, for example, if it asked you, find a word that means the same as tidy, and you don't know which word it's going to be, a good hint of how to solve these answers is try replacing the word in the passage and seeing if the sentence makes sense. So if you think that the word is neat, but you're not sure, then you can try replacing tidy in the place of the word neat and see if it makes sense. If it doesn't, you can try fitting it in another place, because in this case, it wouldn't make sense to say tidy striped pattern of the wallpaper. So then you can continue to look for other words, and that's how you know if you've gotten the right answer. The fact that the question has options obviously makes it a lot easier for you. And at the end of everything, you should just check that no two of your questions have exactly the same answer. So for example, if for question 2 and question 1, you've written exactly the same reason, it's probably not the right answer for one of them, because the passage will never test the same thing twice. So a good way to check is that your questions' answers are in the order of the way they appear in the passage. And Second, that nothing has been repeated exactly the same in two answers, because that's highly unlikely to be the correct answer. And once you're done with it, you can just read all your answers again to make sure that the grammar is in place and that you've written all of the parts of the questions, like part 1 and part 2. And if part 2 is asking for 4, then you've actually written 4 points. Once you check all of that, you should be good to go and you can submit your comprehension. You've probably gotten everything correct. Yeah, that's how you solve a written comprehension. I hope this was easy to understand. And yeah, thank you.